So if you want to go out hunting for one of those teams that has the potential to have the stars align for them, I think Louisville is a good team to go after.
Everybody loves watching the college football playoffs. It's a great introduction. I'm really happy, and it's an exciting time of year at the end of the football season to be watching the college football playoffs. And there's some best bets to make right now in the futures market for the college football playoffs. And we're going to be bringing on our college football betting expert, Ryan McCrystal, to discuss some of his favorite bets on teams to make or miss the college football playoffs momentarily. But before we do that, I just want to mention you can get all of our NFL futures for 60% off if you enter the code SAVE60. It'll drop the price down to $100 for all of our NFL futures. We already hit one with Daniel Jones being named the starter over Anthony Richardson. That was a bet. Daniel Jones was the underdog. We took Daniel Jones. We haven't cashed it yet. We have to wait for week 1 to roll out here, but feeling very good about that one now that Daniel Jones has been named the starter by the Indianapolis Colts. And we've got, I think, close to 18 other futures that are live for you to bet right now in the NFL. And we're going to be releasing more before the start of the season. So make sure that you take advantage of that deal. Use coupon code SAVE60 to get 60% off the NFL futures. Now let's go ahead and welcome in Ryan McCrystal to talk about the college football playoffs. And we're going to be running through some of his favorite bets to make in this marketplace. Now, we've got some very heavy favorites because that's what this market is. And then we also have some underdogs. So we've got a little bit of a mix here. We're going to talk about some of the more heavy favorites to start things off. And obviously to be willing to bet some of these prices, Ryan, at minus 375, minus 300, etc., you got to feel really, really confident. So I'm obviously expecting you to paint a very confident picture for us on some of these teams. Let's start with Tennessee. You've got Tennessee minus 375 to miss the playoffs. You don't think they're going to get in. Why is that?
Yeah, obviously we saw Tennessee make the playoff last year and then got stomped by Ohio State in that first round game, kind of showing that maybe they didn't necessarily belong in the first place after running through what was a relatively easy schedule by SEC standards. One of the biggest storylines of all of college football this offseason was losing Nico Iamaleava to UCLA in the transfer portal. That happened late in the process, and so Tennessee was basically left without a quarterback. They settled for the one guy who was available, who was the guy then leaving UCLA, Joey Aguilar, who actually played last season at App State, but had transferred to UCLA to be their starter. Iamaleava becomes available. UCLA goes after him. Aguilar's left without a home. Tennessee's left without a quarterback. So it's a marriage of convenience there. Not necessarily where Aguilar wants to be, not who Tennessee wants as their quarterback. Now, it could work if Tennessee were able to have the dominant defense that they had last year, but they lost a lot of talent on that side of the ball. I think they'll still have a good defense. I don't think Tennessee is going to take a massive step back and miss a bowl game or anything like that, but the strength of that team last year was its pass rush. James Pierce Jr. was a force on that defense, and obviously he was a first-round NFL draft pick. They also lost defensive tackle Omar Norman-Lott, who was a second-round pick in the NFL draft. Those two alone combined for 33% of Tennessee's pressures. So this wasn't a defensive unit that was incredibly deep and just coming at you from all angles. They had two studs on the defensive line who were able to get after it and wreak a lot of havoc and led the team in pressures. And without those two guys, you can't really ever expect to replace that level of production that those two gave them last year. So I think this is probably going to be a rebuilding year. And if the defense isn't living up to that level, you're going to have to get more out of your offense. And Joey Aguilar's not the guy to do that. App State, with him at quarterback, they went 5-7 last year. It's not like he was lighting up G5 level competition. He was a so-so quarterback at G5. Maybe you could say he was a little above average for that level. Obviously, UCLA was attracted to him to give him a chance at the Power 4 level. But UCLA was one of the worst Power 4 teams last year. They're not anywhere close to the top tier of the Big Ten. They were not really expected to compete for a bowl game when Aguilar was projected to be their starter. He's kind of just a guy. He's a guy who fills in, and he's a game manager. And Tennessee probably needs a lot more than that to make up for the fact that their defense is lacking. So I think the only reason that, this is minus 375 that you said is obviously, you're laying a lot there, but I think the only reason it's not minus 500 or minus 600 is the fact that they did make the playoff last year. So they're a playoff contender in people's minds. But when you look at the roster, I don't think they're going to sniff that level of success.
And I also wonder how that loss, resonates with people this year. And they're thinking, hey, we went ahead and put them in last year. They're worse this year, and they got slaughtered last year. Maybe they didn't deserve it last year. Why would we stick them in this year? So that could definitely be playing in your favor as well. And like you said, a minus 375, it's still a good bet to make if the correct odds should be minus 500 or higher. So that's going in your favor for Tennessee to miss the playoffs. If Tennessee's out, there's another team that you think stands a very good chance of making the playoffs, and that's Penn State. Penn State is minus 300 to make the playoffs, but you love Penn State and you think that they're going to be able to make the playoffs this year. Talk to us about why that is and why it's worth laying minus 300 on them to do so.
Yeah, I mean, the last 2 years in college football, we've seen a team from the Big Ten return everybody and win the national title. Michigan did it 2 years ago where all of their seniors came back. Last year, Ohio State did the same thing. This year, Penn State seniors got together and decided to do the same thing. They all returned. And I think that given the talent that's returning for Penn State, if they were wearing the jerseys of Ohio State or Georgia or Alabama, this number would be like minus 500 or minus 600. Like we would be talking about them as like, well, yeah, obviously they're making the playoffs with all that talent. Are you kidding me? But it's Penn State and their head coach is James Franklin. And so that's the reason why they're not viewed as this absolute no-brainer lock to win at least 10 games and make the playoff, because James Franklin, I'm going to throw out a scary stat for Penn State fans here, against teams that ended the year in the AP top 10, James Franklin at Penn State is 1-22. So if you're skeptical about betting Penn State to win the national title, after all, they are ranked second in the poll, so they're theoretically a title contender. If you're skeptical of that, by all means, be skeptical of that. James Franklin has not proven he's capable of beating legit powerhouse national title contending teams. He's never done it. Even that one win was 9 years ago at home against Ohio State. So he has not proven that he's capable of Penn State meeting their expectations, but they don't even have to come close to meeting expectations to make the playoffs. They play Oregon and Ohio State, to potential, maybe even likely top 10 teams. If they lose those two games and just beat everybody else, which James Franklin, for all his struggles against great teams, he's very good at winning the games he's supposed to win. If their season plays out like that, they go 10-2, they're in the playoffs. You win this bet. They can lose in the first round to a good team, you still win this bet. Like James Franklin can remain James Franklin and fall well short of the fan base's expectations and still get to the playoff. I will add, though, that we should mention, because of all the talent they're returning and all the talent Oregon lost, Penn State actually on the look-ahead line is favored against Oregon. So they're only an underdog in one game this year, and that's the Ohio State game, which I think we expect them to lose. But even that one, you never know. Ohio State did lose a ton of talent. Obviously, they recruit as well as anybody, so they could replace it. But there's no doubt about it, Penn State has more proven talent than either Ohio State or Oregon, which is why they're ranked so highly. So given all of that talent, and given the fact that you don't even need James Franklin to shake his reputation for losing big games, this is just a no-brainer. Penn State is going to win 10 games at least and make the playoff.
Yeah, and their win total is sitting right at 10.5. So getting 10 double-digit wins or so, it's hard to see them being on the outside looking in here, especially with all the hype that's leading into it. As you said, early preseason ranked number 2 team in the country. So things are boding well for Penn State. And I notice a pattern here. Tennessee losing a bunch of players, maybe looking to the outside in. Penn State returning everybody. Now we got to talk about another team that lost a bunch of players, especially at the quarterback position with Ole Miss. You've got Ole Miss to miss the playoffs at minus 275. We obviously know Jackson Dart was drafted by the New York Giants and has looked pretty good in preseason. What is your take on Ole Miss? Why do you feel so strongly that they're not going to make the playoffs this year?
Yeah, well, they missed the playoffs last year with one of the most talented teams in program history and against a relatively easy schedule by SEC standards. The way the schedule shook out for them last year, because of the expanded conferences, it's possible for you to sometimes miss some of the best teams, which they mostly did last year. And it took some really bad upsets for them to miss the playoffs. Obviously, there was that loss to Kentucky early in the year, just completely inexcusable to a 4-win Kentucky team losing that game. And Lane Kiffin loses games like that. And he managed to do it last year with a first round quarterback leading the way. There were really high expectations for Ole Miss last year, not only to get to the playoff, but maybe even compete for an SEC title. And obviously that they weren't able to pull that off. They collapsed in some big moments. This year, they've got an inexperienced quarterback in Austin Simmons, who there are relatively high expectations for him. Maybe as he gains experience, he eventually gets up to that Jackson Dart level, but I don't think we can expect that from him in year one, especially when the schedule is a 180 and it gets really tough. They play 5 games this year against teams ranked in the preseason top 25. Just to enter the playoff conversation, they probably got to win at least 3 of those games. They got to get to 10 wins to make the playoffs. And so you're expecting Ole Miss to do what they couldn't do with one of the best teams Lane Kiffin has ever coached as a head coach. I don't see why we would expect them to do that with an inexperienced quarterback against a much more challenging schedule. This just seems like, again, kind of similar to Tennessee. I think the line is where it is because there have been high expectations for Ole Miss in recent years, even if they didn't quite live up to that last year. They've been talked about as playoff contenders for a while now. The expectation is that Kiffin's a big name. He's going to get guys in. They're going to compete. I don't think this year. I think maybe at best they're like an 8-win team this season.
All right, now I want to talk about the SEC conference. As I mentioned in one of the conference preview videos, one of the favorite conferences for most people in the country is just watching SEC football. They've been so good for so long. SEC, which, by the way, make sure that you guys are subscribing to our channel and go back and look at all those conference preview videos we did where we had Ryan give best bets for every single one of the major conferences out there. You are not going to want to miss any of those videos, I assure you. Let's talk about the number of teams from the SEC to make the playoffs. That line is set at 3.5. The over is -190. You think that there's going to be at least 4 teams from the SEC that are going to make the conference playoffs, the college football playoffs. Talk to us a little bit about why you would bet over 3.5 SEC teams to make the college football playoffs.
Yeah, well, this might sound a little counterintuitive after I just gave out Tennessee and Ole Miss to miss the playoffs, right? But there's just so many teams that are contenders that I think you can bet against those 2 to miss the playoffs and still feel good about the SEC getting 4 teams in. I think there are 6 teams that are very serious contenders: Texas, Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Florida, and I would put Oklahoma in there. I'm higher on Oklahoma than some people, but I think that they have enough talent with a bunch of transfers coming in to transform that offense and be a serious threat to make it to the postseason. Of those 6, I think 4 get in. Texas, Alabama, Georgia, LSU, I think are the most likely, but Florida and Oklahoma are definitely should be knocking on the door, especially if DJ Lagway has had some health concerns at Florida, but if he's healthy, they should be knocking on the door of the playoffs. There's also 3 others who are ranked: South Carolina, Texas A&M, Ole Miss, 4, and Tennessee, who are ranked teams who also have the potential to get into the playoffs. Obviously, we just talked about Ole Miss and Tennessee and why I don't think they are, but South Carolina and Texas A&M are also right there. Again, I don't think any of those teams are going to make the playoffs, but you add all that up, and that's 10 teams that are at least entering the season hoping to make the playoffs and it's kind of in the conversation. And I would even throw Auburn in as a dark horse. They're not ranked, but they did very well in the transfer portal. And Hughes Freeze has been a proven winner at his past stops. This could be the year that he turns things around for Auburn, especially getting a former 5-star recruit transferring at quarterback and Jackson Arnold and some other offensive weapons. That's potentially 11 teams that at least those teams think they're entering the year to compete for a playoff spot. If that ends up with only 3 teams in the playoff for the SEC, that'd be pretty wild. Things would have to really go awry for the SEC to only end up with 3 teams, with so many teams with the talent. I think the SEC this year is maybe a little bit reminiscent of the Pac-12 a couple of years ago when they had Bo Nix and Michael Penix and Caleb Williams and all of those big name quarterbacks. This year, when you look around at all the different conferences and how the quarterback talent is distributed, especially high level returning quarterbacks, it's concentrated in the SEC this year. And that's a good recipe for teams rising up, like we saw in the Pac-12 in the last year of the Pac-12's existence. All of those quarterbacks elevated those programs to the point where multiple teams made the playoff. It was a really, Washington, had one of the greatest seasons in program history with Michael Penix there. It was a great year for the Pac-12. given the distribution of quarterback talent this year, I think the SEC sort of reestablishes itself as the clear-cut best conference in college football this year and has a bunch of teams in the playoff conversation, potentially even a 10-win team sitting on the outside of the playoff picture when it is all said and done, just because in an expanded conference, you might have too many 10-win teams from one conference knocking on the door of the playoff conversation at the end. So I think they get at least 4 teams in, and 5 is plausible. It's not likely that we'll ever see that happen, but it is mathematically possible.
Wow, 10 wins sitting on the outside of the picture potentially for the SEC. You're getting me all fired up to watch SEC football, Ryan. I already was excited to watch these games starting very soon here. Looking forward to the college football season a ton. And just a quick reminder, Ryan is going to be joining us every single week to give his best bets. Obviously, you see he's a font of information there, giving his best bets every single week throughout the course of the season. He's right here on the Sharp Football Show. So make sure that you guys are subscribed to get all of those episodes throughout the course of the season. Now I got one last one for you, Ryan, a long shot. I said, hey, you got a lot of favorites here. Give me a long shot. And you did. You gave us a plus 350 long shot here on Louisville to make the college football playoffs. Talk to us a little bit about what you see from Louisville that could have you thinking that they're decent value to make the playoffs this year.
Yeah, like you said, obviously taking a lot of favorites in these playoff bets, but I think that's kind of in general the way that you want to attack playoff betting, because for the most part, the best teams in college football with the most money make the playoffs every year, especially as we enter this 12-team system. That's what we're going to see. Teams like Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, they're going to make the playoffs more often than not. So just bet on those teams. But other teams sneak in. Last year, we had Indiana and SMU sneak into the playoff, who certainly were not, cemented in the conversation before the season started. So if you want to go out hunting for one of those teams that has the potential to have the stars align for them, I think Louisville is a good team to go after. It's mostly about the schedule, much like SMU, who came out of the ACC last year. I think Louisville, just like SMU last year, is not a typical playoff team from a talent perspective, but they're a good team, a solid top 25 team. And if the schedule aligns just right, that can be enough in this era of college football to sneak you into a 12-team playoff, because more often than not, if you get to 10 wins, even if you're in the ACC or the Big 12, you're going to be a playoff team. And there is definitely a path for Louisville this year. Now they have 3 tough games. They play Miami, Clemson, and SMU. I suspect in every other game, the other 9 games on their schedule, they will be favored by at least a field goal, and in most of those games, more than a field goal. They should win at least 9 games if they just take care of business against the teams that they are clearly better than. Then if you win those 9 games, all you got to do is beat Miami, Clemson, or SMU. Just win one of those games, and you're at 10. You're probably playing for the ACC title, and like we saw with SMU last year, even if you lose that game, if you've got those 10 wins banked already, you got a really good chance to make the playoffs. So, like I said, I don't think Louisville is a top 12 team based on talent, but they're good enough with the schedule aligned just right that a 10-win season is very much on the table if they just win one of those big games on their schedule.
All right, well, there we go. Louisville plus 350 to make the playoffs. That'll round out the long shot and favorite bets that we've got for the college football playoffs here from Ryan McCrystal, our betting expert over at Sharp Football Analysis. Make sure that you are following along on YouTube and go search out all of those other college football conference previews that we did earlier this offseason so that you could check out some of Ryan's favorite bets as we head into the college football season. It's going to be an outstanding season. We've got an outstanding deal to pair with that. We've got 60% off my NFL futures, a $100 better, won over $2,000 with the bets that we gave out last year in this futures package. And we're giving this futures package to you for 60% off. That'll drop the price down just to $100. A great deal. You don't want to miss it. We have close to 20 futures bets. We've already on the verge of cashing one with Daniel Jones being named starting quarterback for the Indianapolis Colts. Many more to follow there with player futures, team futures, etc. Head on over to sharpfootballanalysis.com. Enter code SAVE60. That will save 60% off the purchase price of the futures package. You don't want to miss it. Be sure to be following us over at Sharp Football Analysis here on YouTube for plenty more college football betting action. Good luck. Enjoy the games this upcoming weekend, and we'll see you later.
Rope.